Yeah, we'll let them. Actually, got this. Then I remember what all was. Right, you're in position. Right, good evening. I'd like to call to order the March 12th, 2024 regular board meeting. I'd like to announce that meetings of the Mechanicsburg Area School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with the recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board's YouTube channel. All would like to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, we'll have a brief moment of silent meditation. Roll call, Mr. Longwell.
Mr. Bradley.
Here.
Mr. Frangel.
Here.
Mrs. Huff. Mr. Kickline.
Here.
Dr. Lebo. Ms. Morgan.
Here.
Dr. Rhodes.
Present.
Mr. Rupp.
Here.
And Mr. Sanker.
Here.
Endorsement of agenda. Do we have any additions to the agenda?
The only item that was added was Monday, following publish of the agenda and Dr. Letty's announcement of his intent to not renew his contract, that we would add that as an agenda item following that announcement. So the agenda was modified for that purpose. So.
All right, very good, thank you. Item 1.07, reading of minutes of the regular board meeting on February 13th, 2024. Do any board members have any corrections to the meeting minutes of February 13th? Seeing none, Mr. Longwell will be accepted as printed. Item 2, hearing of visitors of items on the meeting agenda. There will be 2 opportunities for public comment this evening. As a reminder, public comment is limited to residents of the school district. At this time, we have reached the first opportunity for public comment. This opportunity is reserved for comments related to items that are listed on the evening's agenda. A second opportunity public comment will occur at the end of the meeting. The second opportunity for public comment is reserved for comments on issues not listed on the agenda and not being voted upon. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per individual and requires community members to observe a reasonable quorum. If you'd like to address the board, please come to the podium and share your name and district address. This is for items that are on the agenda scheduled to be voted on tonight. Ma'am.
Good evening, Christina Fleischer, 1 Mayfield Road, Mechanicsburg. I'm coming to talk about the school calendar and how it includes days to avoid remote learning. I have a student in 1st grade here, at Shepherdstown and 3 at West Shore Christian Academy. And thankfully, we only had to experience 1 of those days this year. But I'm a little anxious about that moving forward, if that is our plan to only have 1 built-in true snow day and then switch immediately to remote learning. And I come with a foot in public and private school, just to let you guys know too that your decisions affect what the private schools do. Even if we think it was possible to have school that day, if Mechanicsburg closes school, that pretty much is a done deal for us because we heavily rely on transportation. So while I have a student here in Mechanicsburg and 3 at West Shore Christian, that presents various problems. One of the things with remote learning that I'm troubled with, it seems like it's more of a remote doing day rather than learning because there's no real instruction. I have a baby that is different in middle school through high school, but K1, K through 5, I'm struggling to see the merit and value of learning occurring on a remote learning day when there's no instruction. You know, we have a packet that's prepared, and that was kind of telling too. The assignments are relevant and they were done within maybe 30 minutes. And to equate to a full day of school, I mean, it never will, and I don't believe it is a substitute. My son's PE assignment was a crossword puzzle to find fruits and vegetables, which is fun, but to me, I thought we could have done a little better with physical activity for PE. And that just, never before COVID, I don't think we would have considered this as a viable option. I don't think it was even on anyone's mind before COVID. And unfortunately, that gave us some ideas that may or may not be best practice or best option. So I don't know. I mean, it looks like the calendar's already up for approval, but I was just hoping there was at least room for one more day to add as a built-in snow day, so we don't have to pivot so quickly to remote learning, especially when we're making decisions based off of forecasts. And Central PA is very fickle with weather. Forecasts can either be 100% accurate or 100% inaccurate. And so I just, knowing that about where we live in our climate, it might be helpful to have a little more cushion so that we don't have to make decisions that don't necessarily need to be made. So yeah, that's all I wanted to come to you about, that as a parent of a wildcat and a bobcat, that it affects us both ways. And I love it. The teachers were available for my student that day, and he didn't need to be seen, but it'd be nice if there was at least a relook at the K-5 structure of remote learning, if that's going to be more. But my biggest ask is that if there could be a little more buffer in the school calendar. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any other comments, Mr. Schaefer?
Robert Schaefer, 904 Peachtree Drive, Upper Island Township. I'm speaking on 9.03, new business personnel, the agreement with Cedarville University as a student teacher, to have an agreement with student teachers to come from Cedarville. I have made this point before. I have not been really satisfied with the answers that were given, but as somebody who worked for quite a number of years training student teachers and serving as a university supervisor at most of the local school districts up and down this area, I find it puzzling and somewhat difficult to understand why the district goes outside of the state, in this case to Pennsylvania, to Ohio, to Cedarville University. I find it difficult to see how a supervisor from Cedarville is going to come 4 times in face-to-face, it says, to observe and then meet with the student teacher and the cooperating teacher. If face-to-face in this day and age means by Zoom, that's also a problem. If Cedarville is hiring a local adjunct to supervise the student teacher local to here, then it's difficult to see, for me, to see how Cedarville University is exercising really a full control or jurisdiction over what that adjunct and what the student teacher is doing. As you know, the state of Pennsylvania is now trying to do better in terms of serving students in Pennsylvania colleges who want to be teachers. It's in the process, I gather, that there will be a stipend for student teachers. Hopefully that will alleviate a little bit of the pipeline. But I think it's much easier to see for a school board to know what the local colleges are, to have a sense of how they operate, what their policies are, as opposed to a college in Ohio. How much do we really know about that college? How much do we know about how they prepare their student teachers? So I would urge the board to think critically about this particular proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Any other comments for items that are listed on the agenda for vote tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, reports and presentations. Item 3.01, Superintendent of Schools report, Dr. Leidy.
Yes, good evening. I have actually 4 items this evening. The first one, I'm just going to tell everybody, is going to be my favorite. We have our youngest Wildcats here, and they're representing the Kindergarten Academy. Each year, as the board knows, we try to bring students in from each of the buildings to share a little bit about what's happening and the impact that the board has in that building, and so we're looking forward to that. Another amazing group that is here this evening is Operation Wildcat, and they are here to present their annual report to us. And then maybe not quite as exciting is the Facility Planning Committee that I will be giving to you, and that Mr. Longwell will be doing the general fund budget. You're all welcome to stay for those presentations too, but you don't have to, obviously. So why don't we get started with our Kindergarten Academy folks, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Sachs to introduce.
All right, good evening, everyone. We have Mrs. McGall here tonight to work along with some of our youngest Wildcats here, and we have Carter. Carter, can you give everybody a wave? And we have Noah. Oh, you can turn a wave to the people back there too. And we have Tom. Okay, and they are super excited to share with you about pennies for Simpson.
All right, and I'm just curious about a clicker for the slideshow. Is that right here? Ah, fabulous. All right, great. Just that, okay. So what we are presenting with you tonight is our cornerstone task. And a little background, a cornerstone task is something that the students do to show learning over time. So it usually spans several units, and this one spans the school year from the beginning of the year until now. What we do is we collect pennies for the Simpson Library. And I think this is a really fitting task because we have the youngest learners here in Mechanicsburg, and I've been a long-time kindergarten teacher, as some of you know, and as a kindergarten teacher, I always get, oh, they're so cute. And as you can see, they really are, but we are actually, we do so much, the kids learn so much, and this task really shows how much we accomplish as kindergarten learners. The other thing is a penny is the smallest unit of money, and as adults, we often think that a penny, there's not much you can do with a penny. But at the Kindergarten Academy, our youngest learners, with a whole lot of pennies, we do something really spectacular. So in addition to just the academics that this performance task does, is it also speaks to the Wildcat way. So you ready? What is the C for?
Communicate with respect.
And A?
Achieve personal goals.
T?
Tackle challenges.
And S?
Serve others.
So this is pervasive throughout our school day, throughout our school year, and it's something we really take to heart through everything at the Kindergarten Academy. So the first thing I want to talk about is how our brains have been growing, and these friends are going to share some of that with you. You ready, Tom?
We learned how to read. We learned fiction and nonfiction.
There we go.
We learned about writing. We learned about the alphabet and words.
And all three of you,
We learned about counting.
and we also learned about.
Community helpers.
In addition to that, following the Wildcat way. So this task encompasses all of those things. So the first thing they had to do was they had to serve their families at home. So they want to share a little bit about what they did at home to earn their pennies. Do you want to go ahead, Tom?
My grandma came to babysit, and it was the perfect, and she had the perfect job for us, and we sorted all of the pen, and she's made us sort money, and I sorted all of the pennies out, and I washed my clothes.
And how did you help Noah?
Picking up rocks.
Do you want to say a little bit more about that? No, okay. How did you help at home?
By putting my dishes away and letting my things.
So at home, they were to serve others to earn their pennies. And then they brought them to school. We collected all of them. And then it was their job to help us, after gathering all those pennies, to figure out how many pennies we had. So in order to do that, we showcased counting accurately by ones and tens. So boys, how many pennies had to go in each cup?
10.
10. And then after that, it was their job to figure out how many pennies, how many cups of pennies you needed to have. Do you remember how many cups of pennies you needed to have?
10.
10 cups of 10. So after that, they got to showcase writing skills by writing the numbers by tens up to 100. Do you guys want to count real quick?
10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100.
Fabulous. After that, they all, the whole school will be doing this, but our class, the Panda class, had a chance to do it already, where we write book suggestions for the librarian. So not only are they showcasing their math skills, but also writing at this point in time. And they get to decide if they want to recommend a certain book or if there's a genre of books. So Tom, would you like to say what you think the library should get?
You should get more Pokemon books because they make you follow your dreams.
And Noah, do you want to share what you think the library should get?
Get some new cat books because they are really exciting.
So we will be presenting all of the letters from our school to the librarian at the Simpson Library, along with all of the suggestions from the whole school. And this is something that the whole school learned as we were kicking off and summing up our cornerstone task, which we did this morning. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Here we go. A penny is 1 cent, it's true. Helping out we all can do. Books for you and books for me. Books for the community. So the whole thing was after community helpers that even in kindergarten, they can be community helpers. So we really appreciate you letting us show off all that we do in kindergarten. We're really proud of our students and really proud of everything they accomplished.
Thank you, Mrs. McGall, and thank you, Mrs. Sachs, and thank you to our students for being here tonight to do this presentation. That was excellent. It shows that what we start learning in kindergarten lasts the whole way through to your senior year in high school and beyond. That's what it's all about. So,
Absolutely. The beyond part's the important thing. You never stop learning. So your foundation you're building, you'll use the rest of your life. You really will. You have excellent teachers there helping you out. I'm very impressed. Anybody else have any?
thank you for being here. You're welcome to stay, but honestly, you don't have to. Thanks very much. The second item under my report this evening is one that has become an annual tradition here with the board, and that is our good friends and partners with Operation Wildcat. And Mr. Bigham is here to introduce.
I am. Welcome. Operation Wildcat has been a part of our community. They're the backbone of our community. Volunteers that came together for a purpose, a mission of meeting the needs of all students in our district. And I'd be remiss if I did not give a little bit of a summary of some of the things that I've heard from those that have benefited from the supports of Operation Wildcat. And I just gave you the top 5 because of, top 10 would take a little bit too long. So words or phrases that describe the gifts of Operation Wildcat. They are a blessing. They are a valued resource. They are the spirit of our community. They provide hope, and they are a gift to the Mechanicsburg Area School District. So with those words, I'd like to introduce the president of Operation Wildcat, Leslie Collins.
Good evening. Operation Wildcat really appreciates taking your time this evening so you can share what we've been doing for the past year. I'm sure a lot of you know what we've been doing because we send out lots of information. You all help us out. This is a very giving community, and Operation Wildcat has a wonderful support system. And some of the project chairs and committee people are here. Stand up so I recognize you. This is just a handful of those of us. We are an all-volunteer organization, but we are happy to serve our community, and hearing the kindergartners talk about their service to community, hope to see them in the future. But I'm not going to go on anymore. I'll let you see our report that was done by a MASH alumni, and you can enjoy it and hear about everything we've done this year.
How do you not feel awesome after that? Come on. Y'all exemplify what community is all about. Seriously, I think it was Project Tannenbaum that said it takes a village, and what an amazing one we have here in Mechanicsburg. Couldn't agree more. Go ahead.
No, I want to thank particularly you, Dr. Leidy, for your support all these years for Operation Wildcat. We can't do what we do without the partnership with the school board, with district staff, with the entire community. It is a huge giving community. Thank you.
It never gets old. Like I have goosebumps as much today as I did the first time you talked about it. And I remember some conversations about hitting, I think it was $100,000 in yard sales and how amazing it was. And you've blown by that and more. And the truck got thrown in there at some point too, I think, if I remember correctly.
And we need more storage.
I hear you.
How many years has it been now? 20?
2006, we started with 4 projects. Yard sale was out of my garage, we were in closets, we were in different people's houses. And as the need has grown, we've grown, and the district has supported us every step of the way.
I just think the one thing I give you a lot of credit for, besides all the great things that you do, is you're bringing in the community, in particular bringing in the school kids into it to show them the need is out there. You know, you think you're in Mechanicsburg, you think there's no need out there for some of them to actually see that there's a need to get that thought of service and giving back and engagement and volunteerism. You know, we keep hearing this generation doesn't volunteer as much, and you're getting the schools, you're getting the teams, you're getting the clubs to volunteer and break down, show that that's not true. And so it's great for the fact that you're bringing that next round of folks that will become the next round of Operation Wildcat. So thank you for all you do.
I tell people everywhere I go how special Mechanicsburg is, and it's all about the community and the work you do. It exemplifies that, and I love how, you know, when we serve, like, you guys obviously make great friendships, lifelong friendships while you're serving, and then bringing in those businesses and bringing in the churches and the entire community coming together to just fill a need. It's incredibly special. So I know sometimes you look at, hey, we provided for like 5 boys to wear a dress shirt, but that made the night, you know, for those boys. So I just really appreciate that. So keep it up.
I always say every year, I say this, and it rings true every year, that your organization is like a seed, and it just grows and grows and grows. And it's just so amazing to think about what you do here in this community and how that grows when all these kids go out. Because I know from my standpoint, my kids know that service is part of where you live and part of a community, and they get that because of you, and they get that because of your partnership with them. And you know, I just watch my children grow and, you know, volunteer to be mentors and to volunteer, and my one son has a, you know, project launch that he started because of you guys. I mean, this is because you guys. So it's just amazing. This is, and that presentation is probably just 1/1000th of what your Operation Wildcat did this year, because what you did is all the stuff that's done around the world from graduates from Mechanicsburg, it's truly special. It's awesome. It's really awesome.
Again, I just always like, wow, is the only thing that comes to my mind. And anytime I get the opportunity to speak publicly about the school, and there's so much credit given to our school district and how it grows the community, and we're one of the few growth areas in Pennsylvania, I always bring up, it's folks like you is why. It's not really the school, it's the entire community interaction. And you know, as Dr. Rhodes said, I mean, what you do to those people, even if it seems like only a couple of numbers, you know, the difference you make in their life that one time is just amazing.
And then they feel part of the community.
Absolutely, and they feel welcome.
Time and time again, there's strangers that are helping us, and and that makes them feel part of the community, and then they are willing to give, because it happens, they give back to the community, they give back to OW, you know, so it's a wonderful circle.
Absolutely. So again, just thank you. I mean, there's nothing else greater than that. It's just
Yeah,
so
the
appreciated.
passion that has grown over the last 18 years is just amazing. Like, I dropped stuff off this past Sunday, and the woman there was just so excited that we were dropping things off, you know, and I know.
Yard sale time. We're going over 300.
But it's just amazing to watch you guys grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, so.
I
You're
have
a
to
part of the
laugh.
community.
I remember the previous superintendent, Joe Hood, and he said, you know, I think we should give them a classroom on the second floor at Elmwood to store some of their stuff. Classroom, and look what it is now.
We now have a basement in the middle school.
Exactly.
We get kicked out.
I think a few people predicted that might happen too, so it's great. I think what you heard here is that your impact on an individual is immeasurable. The ripple effect that you have on the community at large and well beyond that is also immeasurable. And it's both of those things that make this so special. I have to tell you, as I was looking at the names associated with each of the project, it just made me warm inside to see names that have been there for a very long time, and also new names that continue to come in and learn from your leadership and the expertise that I'm looking at particular three ladies sitting right there and what you've done for the entire life of Operation Wildcat. So thank you for that and all the other volunteers too. We appreciate it. I think you have an assignment tonight now. Is there a meeting afterwards?
Yeah,
or-
right downstairs, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
very
again.
much.
It's just unbelievable.
Okay, there's the meeting.
There you go.
Let's see you follow that up.
Yeah. Reverse these orders. I think I'd learned that by now.
Yeah.
All
How
right.
much money have you earned this year?
Yeah, exactly. So the third item under my report this evening is related to the Facilities Planning Committee. And honestly, these next two presentations are simply previews to what we're going to go into in much more depth at the March work session. But we wanted to just get them back on your radar, if you will, especially this one. And then the next one connects obviously to the budget. So real quick, a walk down memory lane. You've seen this many, many times before, but now it's almost 10 years ago that we did an initial feasibility study around what we realized was significant growth that was happening in the community. At the time, if you remember, we had literally we were using closets for instructional space. The library in this building had to be moved out of the library to use it as a classroom, and so the library was actually in the hallway in this building. And so in 15-16, we were looking specifically at what can we do around those enrollment increases, but also how do we ensure equity in the district. And so the committee was formed and came up with recommendations, and what started then was what we called MASD on the move, and the literally moving students and buildings and beginning a construction project, or projects I should say. About a year ago, we decided that it was time to consider these projects that were on the horizon that came out of that feasibility study in 15-16 starting to wrap up. But we're never done. It's like your own home, right? You're never done with the maintenance and the things that we have to hold on to. And so we looked at a needs assessment and also what's a prioritized list of projects now moving forward that we want to engage in as a district. So that really there was an essential question here. What are the buildings and grounds needs that we'll have to address to best support our learning community in the next 5 to 7 years? Or said a different way, 2030. Remember Y2K? Yeah, a little while ago. But what's intriguing about that 2030 number is that if you go back to 15, that's actually a 15-year span in the history of our district. And when you think about the life of projects, the life of systems, if you will, that's a pretty significant part of it. So looking out 5 to 7 years, we truly believe is the right thing to do. Kudos to this board in 15 and 16 with having the foresight and the vision to say we have to do something in the district to stay on top, serve those 5-year-olds and all the way up through the system. So not nearly as extensive as the feasibility study that we did in 15, 16, but still I think a really important step. And Mr. Longwell is going to talk to you a little more about what we specifically did.
So I think as we transition, and Dr. Lady articulated well, as we continue to wrap up our construction projects and that were really formed by those feasibility study recommendations, or that those served as the foundation, we know that looking ahead, we still have to continue to think about facilities because, as was said, some systems, mechanical systems in particular, might only have a 15 or 20-year life, right? You know, our roofs might have 15, 20, 25-year warranties, and all of those things were upgraded at different points in time. And so as we look forward to 2030, part of the planning committee, the facilities planning committee, was to go back and say, you know, in 2015-16, we had come up with feasibility study recommendations. We had designed projects at the time based on the needs that we saw in the foreseeable future around things like academic program, around a growing enrollment, and also around mechanical and infrastructure. But we recognized that through those projects, if there were things like useful life left on our HVAC systems, we wanted to maximize that, right? You know, the same with roofs. And frankly, in the last 10 years and looking ahead even to 15 years, the next, I should say that horizon of 15 years, times have changed and there might be other needs that have come up. And so I guess the first guiding question the Facilities Planning Committee we looked at was what items were not included in the scope of the projects when we started all of this in 2015. And they might not have been included because maybe they weren't a priority for us at that time, and maybe the needs have changed. They may not have been included at the time because, like Elmwood's HVAC system, we wanted to try to get more life out of that and maximize the use of it. And so go back and cross-check that to say, are some of their needs looking different now here that we are in 2024, and what's that look like to 2030? I think the next three questions, though, are also engaging our stakeholders to say, what else has arisen since 2015? And so, you know, the district has grown. It's interesting, about a year ago, I think we shared with the board that we had looked back at that point 10 years prior at all the school districts, the 500 school districts in the state, and by percentage, we were the 6th fastest growing school district during that 10-year period of time. Cumberland Valley was the 5th. And again, by percentage, you know, obviously numbers, you know, Cumberland Valley is bigger than us. But I think it's fascinating when you look at just how fast Cumberland County is growing in the state. And when you look at that, the fastest two growing districts in Cumberland County are us and Cumberland Valley. And so that's not just enrollment, but what does programs look like in the face of education? And so going back and engaging our stakeholders, which included some board representation, it included our building administrators, some of our building administrators, our support administrators, and other stakeholders to do some of this work to say what needs have arisen since. The other thing was going back, and we've talked a little bit about it here in this presentation, but what has reached the end of our useful lives, you know? And so in particular, we know Elmwood Academy and also the middle school, back in 2015, you know, we had to make decisions about Elmwood Academy because it was one of our early buildings and it helped be kind of the linchpin, if you will, to allow all these other projects to unfold in the order they did. So we know there are still probably some needs maybe around mechanical infrastructure, et cetera, at Elmwood. We know middle school might have its own needs because that building was completed around 2002, 2001 maybe, somewhere in there. It's hard to believe, but that building now is over 20 years old, right? You know, and so it might have its own needs as you look forward to 2030 around things like mechanical and infrastructure, maybe even an academic program. Enrollment, I think we'll continue to study that. Luckily, the board at the time had the foresight. I think they saw some growth in enrollment potentially because of what was happening around potential new developments, and they had added on to that building across the back and made a classroom wing. And so all of those things are things we want to continue to study and that we asked the planning committee to consider to provide feedback on. And then as a final piece, the school district grounds, how can they be used most effectively? And that's everything from community use to athletics, to extracurricular, to recreation, our partnerships with our municipalities, and so there's some layers to that. All that to say, the Facilities Planning Committee then, using those guided questions, we had assembled a group of stakeholders to look at some focus areas that included building an infrastructure. It included athletic, community, recreation, extracurricular. It included support spaces like storage, office space, and grounds. And honestly, to support the work of the Facilities Planning Committee, we also asked them, because of other ongoing conversations that we've been having as a district, we do a nice job of planning in different areas that, hey, you know, going back and crosswalking those feasibility study committee recommendations from 2015, we talked a little bit about that already, but we did have an athletic program evaluation, and what were the recommendations from that committee, that group of stakeholders? Are there facility implications there? We did an extracurricular program evaluation a number of years ago. Are there recommendations or considerations that might have some facility implications there that our Facilities Planning Committee should consider? And then also office space and storage study. We've done our own work internally to study, you know, where are we with office spaces and distribution of offices? How are we doing with storage? And so really asking the Facilities Planning Committee, again, a representative group of stakeholders, to study the questions around what needs might exist as a district, looking at some focused areas to kind of guide our work, and then also pulling in recommendations maybe from other committee work that's already occurred. And so really, I think quite a comprehensive process. Certainly not as full-blown as a feasibility study, but I think a good effort to vet out maybe what some needs might look like. As next steps, what we're doing administratively is that stakeholder group has provided a good listing of here's some considerations or needs that we think we want to look at. And administratively, our plan then is to come back to the school board with a prioritized list to say, of all of the recommendations from the committee, here's administratively what we would hope to reach in the more near term, maybe here's medium term, here's long term, and then how does that fit in, frankly, with our priorities and also funding, you know, capital reserve fund and those things. So by way of preview, that was continued update on Facilities Planning Committee, going back and reminding about some of the work we did, but also what we've been looking at, and then what our goal is to come back to the board with a prioritized list of projects and needs that take us through 2030.
How long is that list?
I will say, Elmwood and Academy and Middle School are on there. I do think there's some other things like athletic and rec and extracurricular that I think. So as far as how long the list is, not dodging the question, but I think that comes down to prioritization, and I think that's what we want to come back to the board. That's our next step, is to try to say, based on to what degree does it impact our academic programs, to what degree does it impact our programs outside the school day, you know, in what order do you do, like if it's infrastructure, in what order do you do HVAC upgrades? And how do you look at that from a financing perspective in terms of our capital reserve fund, which is our savings account, money we have available. And so putting all that together into a plan to say this is what we see as the next 5 to 7 years based on the feedback from us.
Good news is you've already addressed two of the significant items on there with the Elmwood HVAC decision. And then I never in a million years would have thought that doors would cost as much as they did, but the doors at the middle school, there was significant cost associated with that. But again, a 22-year-old building, and those doors got used quite a bit. So two of the things that are on the list, the board has already addressed.
Well, we cross them right off,
You can
right?
cross those right off, that's right. But there's more to come, so we're never done.
And I will say this, Mr. Hoffman has always been a champion of our facilities. I think, as this board knows, he comes annually with kind of the capital reserve fund list, the budget that we look at for our summer projects or the upcoming 12 months oftentimes. That's feedback from our principals, our administrators, our staff. The Facilities Planning Committee, we see that coming alongside the work that Eric does to help to say, this committee has helped identify some things that might exist over the next 3, 5, 7 years, and how does that fit in with the work Eric's doing to bring recommendations back to the board, and what Dr. Lady and I talked with Eric about, knowing that I think I'll just repeat what Dr. Lady said. We're never really done, and so even the facilities planning committee, as we come and say, here's what we see over the next 7 years, on an annual basis, there's going to be things that just still naturally come up, and Eric's going to have to identify those as part of the work that his team does, working with our principals in our buildings. But really, we wanted to try to at least say, if we're engaging our stakeholders and taking a comprehensive look at things as it stands today, what are some things we think the board we'd like to engage the board and talk about. So.
I thought I'd add, as I sat on this committee, that just to echo what Greg was saying, it was a really comprehensive view of things. And I thought it was a very methodical approach to maybe some forgotten things that we're thinking about buildings, right? We think about, well, what are we going to do with Elmwood next, but like down to fields and down to storage facilities. And they let me be a part of the storage support spaces subcommittee of it, which, you know, when you get that book at graduation, oh, the places you'll go, like they don't really mean the basement of Elmwood, but I was there, and yeah, it was very special. All the nooks and crannies. So
saw the old flood line, right?
Yeah, we saw.
Room. Yeah.
I've seen many places now, and can attest to all of our support spaces. But yeah, I think it's a much better way to approach this than coming and saying we're gonna do this with this athletic field, or we want to change this, building this way. And so I think this is I really appreciate that you brought this forward as let's think for the next 7 years about it, because it is going to continue to happen. And if we don't have this plan, it is going to seem, without the plan, it seems knee-jerk to be like, why are we replacing the doors at the middle school, right? And so I'd rather we have this to guide us.
And I think this can be used in what we're discussing at our board induction tonight with 2 of our new board members is, when the public approaches you about these kind of things, this is where there's a broader committee has probably already looked at it, and there is a plan in place that it's not, they're seeing a single item of maybe a field their kid plays on, but by doing this, you'll see as time goes on, oftentimes these things are already in queue, just waiting for the appropriate time to be done. So that might answer some of the other questions we were talking about tonight in the induction meeting.
Now, question for you, and because this is kind of how I run my household when I look at projects. Theoretically, we borrowed a substantial amount of money for the upgrades to the school district over the last several years. Theoretically, those upgrades should be good for the life of our financing for those buildings, theoretically, right? So do you know what I'm getting at here? So, and I heard that you said, well, you looked at some things that we actually didn't address, which, okay, I'm like, okay, I got that. Okay, that sounds great. But when we start talking about length of life and theoretically, the financing should match the length of life.
It should, yes. And I think maybe.
I mean, I don't know. I would hope.
So the idea is that when you look at our bonds, yes, the idea is that we wouldn't want to go back and do renovation projects within the time period necessarily of the debt that's outstanding. I think as we did go through renovation projects, we didn't build new buildings, and frankly, I think saved a substantial amount of money by doing renovations of our existing buildings. But maybe more to your question, I think a good example of that is Elmwood, while a much larger scale of HVAC upgrade because of the life that it had left. With all of our elementary schools, there were some pockets of rooftop units that had life left that we didn't just say, we'll upgrade all of the rooftop units all at the same time, because there might have been, hey, a unit here or two units there that's like, why upgrade that if there's 5 or 10 years left of life left? We knew that we'd have to come back to that. But to your point, the new units that were installed, we shouldn't be upgrading them in 10 years. No.
Yeah, right. See, do you know what I mean? I just get nervous a little bit. You want to be, I mean, we really want to serve our students, our community, but we also want to, it's up to all of us to sit here and really question what we're doing.
Well, when you look at it, though, you're right.
No,
all the financing so far has been, the financing of the last 7 years was all the buildings except MMS. And the work we did at Elmwood was like pieces, and it's such a big building
Yeah.
that the piece, no, I'm with you. This was the exact question of like, why is Elmwood on here at all? But it's the
It
parts of
never leaves.
that's the price of Elmwood living in the middle of the district, I think, that you can't quit Elmwood,
Well,
right?
and I'll just say it one more time, because I only got so many more times to say it, but we have to remember that what we did at Elmwood started the whole thing, and there was no way possible to get the kids in there and do the entire project at the same time. It was impossible, and we knew that from the beginning.
Right.
And we also realized that enrollment, about 2 years into it, was going even faster than we anticipated, which required us to do more.
Yep.
But even with all of that, we never did at Elmwood what we did at the other buildings, and that's why it has been piecemealed.
We also were limited by our debt ceiling, where we had to pay off
That came into effect.
prior debt
Yep.
before we could.
This just speaks to the fact that we need a plan. I'm not saying, and I think that just keeping all that in mind, I think you're right. I think we need to keep doing this, but we have to be cognizant of what we've already done, what we financed,
Right.
and where we go from here.
Absolutely. And I think even within your comments, I think it's even worth some reflection, because I think it is kudos to the board and administration that even as you go back to 2015 and look at the way we did scope out the projects and the price tag we were willing to assume, the order in which we did the buildings, how we financed it and phased all the millage in. So over the last 8 years, we've embarked on these projects. We've issued our debt along the way incrementally. We've built it into our budget and stepped it in a way that we didn't create drastic swings in our budget. And all the while, our fund balance is still very good and stable. And so we haven't drawn down our reserves significantly or unexpectedly. And so the fact that we're still maintaining our credit rating, I think all of that points to responsible planning, and frankly, 7 or 8 years of it. It's pretty incredible when you see the magnitude of what we were able to accomplish. And it's really a credit to the board and administration for being able to put such a plan together and execute it the way we did. But
Yeah, but a lot of credit goes to your department too, to look at the finances and prepare and decide when it's a good time to refinance a lot of stuff too. So you need a lot more credit than anybody else.
I appreciate that. It's a team effort.
I think Mr. Biggin said it right. Blessing, a gift. What were the top 5 things he said? I'm going to use that for you, Greg, too, because that was a lot. There's a lot of moving parts there.
Seriously moving parts. The good news is, speaking of the borrowing, as we begin to wrap up, we have another borrowing coming. We'll be talking about that, and it'll be the last as per the plan. If things continue on the trajectory that they're on, we may be able to address some of these items with that last borrowing, so. One more.
One more presentation. Yeah, one more presentation.
Just keep rolling, Mr.
All right.
Blumwell. You are doing great.
Thank you, sir. I don't know about you, but budget is exciting. Earlier presentations were good. They were good. Just trying to re-energize the room a little
I
bit here.
just say to the new guys, the budget is just over your head for 4 years. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, I kind of get it now. So don't feel bad.
Yeah.
This goes over your head.
Well, and to Ms. Morgan's point, it is an incredibly complex, and so it takes time, and our board is so well educated. And part of that is our effort to work in partnership with our board and administration to talk about budget, and we go through several iterations of presentations to just kind of talk about where we are, where we're heading. And so tonight is one of those presentations as we come back and look at the revenue side of the budget. And so just, I think, by way of a quick reminder, I'll make a quick connection to the last presentation where we talked about the different committees and how many people spoke into those different processes. I think it's also a testament to our budget process as a district. And so this isn't Dr. Lady, myself, and Mr. Bitts or Mr. Bigham sitting together and deciding what the $100 million budget is going to look like, but rather we engage many stakeholders, teacher leaders, our administrators, and you can see there through the budget development calendar that we have a total of 42 cost centers. And so there's at a minimum 42 or more meetings. Really, there's probably more than 42 meetings if we're being truthful. Because each cost center might have multiple meetings. Some of the cost centers might have multiple meetings. And so we have a very, very thorough budget process where we do engage stakeholders, we look at needs, we prioritize, we look at how all that gets folded into the budget. And then ultimately, as we're developing the budget for a final recommendation for the school board, we're also having conversations with the board to update on, like in January, how are we doing with revenue and expense trends? And so what I would say with revenue and expense trends, which might be a little bit different than the cost centers, is that those are, with revenue, we like to look at like, well, how are we doing with earned income tax? Like, what's the trend there? What's happening with assessed value and development in the community? What's happening with, on expense side, what's happening with our health insurance, right? You know, so it's not so much that there was a change in the plan, but rather the utilization and the costs that we're seeing and what are those trends looking like. And so as a kind of a kickoff to the budget season with the board, we look in January or the late fall, early winter, normally those trends. And so then as we head to March, we're really getting the final budget ready for our presentation. And we split that into 2 budget meetings, in part to help manage the length of the meeting, but also to purposely focus on the revenue. And then we come back in a second part of a budget conversation to look at the expense. And so tonight we're looking at March 12th, the revenue, final revenue budget. And then March 26th, here in a couple weeks, we will return with a final expense budget, which includes some staff proposals, because we are a growing, vibrant district, and what programmatic needs might exist. So, with respect to revenue, I always like to remind about the Act 1 index, and so we'll talk about it a little bit about that this evening. And then with revenue, as the board knows, there really is 3 buckets, right? You know, if you were to categorize our revenue, there's those that come from local sources, those that come from state sources, and those that come from federal sources. And so tonight we'll kind of take a little deeper dive into each of those buckets and talk about what were some significant changes because of trends or things that we're seeing, and we'll highlight those for the school board. So with respect to the Act 1 index, the base index is 5.3% for this upcoming school year. The adjusted index is at 6.5%, and so as a reminder, all school districts can raise their taxes to at least the base index in any given year. That's applicable for all 500 school districts. What the state does is they go back, and for any school district that has a market value aid ratio above 0.4, without diving into a lot of detail and complexity there, they get a further adjustment and they can go higher. And so the adjusted index is based on those calculations, and our Act 1 adjusted index, which is specific to Mechanicsburg, is 6.5%.
Right, those are ceilings of what you
Those are
can raise.
ceilings,
Yeah,
yes.
That's not
Yes,
the minimum.
that's not our recommendation. Just glad you said that. Those are ceilings, and schools may, within any given year, go up to those ceilings. So whether that's the base index or the adjusted index, it depends on each school district, one by one of the 500. Then I would say, with respect to Mechanicsburg, one thing we have been doing is stepping in the debt service, the mortgage payment, if you will. And so since 2015-16, when we began the feasibility study recommendations and then began issuing our debt, we have set aside 8% or 1.5% each year to help support those rising debt service payments, which really are the mortgage payment, is another way to say that. And so where we stand with our financing plan, we'll talk about this in the slides to come, is that for next year, to support the financing and construction, we had committed years ago that we would continue to raise taxes in this way at 1% for 24-25. And then just as a reminder, for 25-26 and 26-27, we had also indicated as part of that plan that there's a 1% set aside in each of those years to support our debt service and frankly the mortgage payment. Now, what we always come back to the board in the second part of the presentation at the end of the month is, up front, as part of the revenue, we do show what the 1% is. We do talk about all the other revenue line items, but operational costs, so what else do we need in terms of a tax increase, is determined as we finalize the budget and look at our expenses and propose staffing, and that's something that we talk with the board typically at the end of March. And so that's why that's TBD, and that's something that we'll determine here as the weeks unfold. In terms of revenue, those 3 buckets, I think for context, it's nice to look at the percentages, and these don't shift very often, too much. Usually about 74-75% of our budget's local sources, about 24% is state sources, and 1% is federal sources. I'll just point out that 1% carries more compliance requirements than all the rest of the 99%. And so said another way, I know that Mr. Bitts, I know Mr. Bigham's part of it too, but Mrs. Woodall, we have several administrators that help manage all of our federal programs and all of the compliance requirements that go with it. Even as an auditor, if you remember when Z had come to talk to us, there's the financial audit, and then at the very back of that report is the single audit, and the single audit is just looking at that 1%. And so they have a whole team that just looks at that when they come out to audit.
That 1%, 1.16, that's pretty high.
Yeah, it's a little higher, it's sneaking up. So when you look at, and to Ms. Morgan's point, through ESSER, and this is a good preview, that actually was even a little higher yet because we did get some ESSER monies to help support through COVID and the pandemic, either operating costs or academic needs to support academic achievement. And so certainly over the last several years, there's been that, but now as we head to 24-25, that money is going completely away. And so as a school district, we've been planning accordingly. When you look at those three buckets, local revenue has increased by about $4.3 million. We'll talk a little bit about what makes up that $4.3 million increase. State revenues increased by about $2.3 million from our estimates. These are our estimates as far as what's contained in the budget. And then a federal revenue budget decrease of $372,000, which is largely the last little bit of ESSER that we have coming out of the budget. And we'll talk about that. So that brings our revenue budget from 23-24 at 91.4 to just about 97.8 million. And we'll in coming slides talk a bit more about those changes. Before we do that though, I always like to go back when we look at revenue, because real estate taxes or income taxes, our local sources are such a big part of our budget, to just go back and talk a little bit about, well, what makes up assessed values. And so assessed values can vary from district to district in terms of the composition of them. In our case, about 88% of our community is residential. You can see the other categories there, land, vacant land, or anything over 10 acres could actually get reduced through clean and green. Commercial is at 5%. I'd like to see that higher, selfishly, just because it does support your local revenue. And tax exempt at 1.87% and other at 1.1. And so when you look at residential growth, those bullet points are just some of the neighborhoods that have been going in around the community. And so I know one thing that does come up sometimes is, with the growth we've had, assessed value has grown, and that's true. It does support our budget, and those are good questions. I think with that, I would point out that while we're adding homes and adding neighborhoods, because it's so heavily centered around residential growth, they come with students. And that goes back to us being one of the fastest growing school districts in the state. So that it's a good thing, you'll hear me talk about this in a couple different contexts tonight. It's a good thing that it helps our revenue side of the budget because we see we are a growing, vibrant community, but because our enrollment has continued to grow the way it has on the expense side of the budget to maintain class sizes and program needs, there's also expenses that come with that too, frankly. And then a couple pieces of commercial development there that are going in just as that's going up. So you could choose the bookends. We were just talking about this in cabinet earlier today, depending on what years you compare. Is it 23-24 back to 16-17? Do you go back to 14-15, 13-14? I'll just share, frankly, generally, the more years you go back, the line keeps going down. Because even at 4,000 as a district, we were lower than that, I think, in the years prior to that. So what I really like to take away and point out here is, again, back to the bookends. So if you go back even before 16-17, that would show you that we've grown by almost 1,000 kids or more. And one thing I like to point out there is, at 1,000 students, that's as big as 5 small school districts in our IU. So if you look at Perry, Dauphin, and Cumberland County, 1,000 students is bigger than 5 individual school districts. In fact, our high school is bigger than 5 individual school districts by itself. And so a growing enrollment, I think, tells the story that we do see assessed values increasing, but we also see enrollment growing, and we also see a direct correlation or connection to what's happening with expenses and staffing needs.
Mr. Littleton, if I recall, didn't we have something a couple of years further out was where we were thinking we were gonna plateau.
Yeah, Decision Insight, yeah, so to Mr. Bradley's point, Decision Insight, and this is good conversation, I think, for the board. We continue to use Decision Insight, so they are demographers from, that's the right word, from out west. And they work with school districts of all sizes across the whole country, and they have done really a great job for us. It's not to say that PD's enrollment projections, you can go out to PD and they have enrollment projections there. It's not to say there's an issue with PD's enrollment projections, but PD even has a disclaimer on it that says, if your community is experiencing extraordinary growth or decline, these enrollment projections aren't enough. You need to do something more to consider what's happening with your enrollment. And so to Mr. Bradley's point, years and years ago, again, credit to planning and the school board and administration, we had contracted Decision Insight to come in and look at our enrollment and make projections about 5 and 10 years out. And those enrollment projections, frankly, helped to inform all of our construction projects that began with the Kindergarten Academy and with Elmwood. And frankly, very good that we did, because we already had modulars on some of these buildings, and we were reaching 100 and 110% capacity. Had we not designed the buildings using Decision Insight and acted as quickly as we would have really had quite a problem on our hands, because that capacity would have become quite a problem for us. And fortunately, because of good planning and Decision Insight, we were able to react and make adjustments accordingly. All that to say, Decision Insight uses the same methodology that PD does. It's called the cohort survival method. Won't bore you with all the details of that. But they take that method and then they go out and actually talk to the municipalities to learn about the housing plans and what's being developed. Legacy Park and others as an example. And so they put all that together to say, over the next 3, 5, 10 years, here's where we see enrollment heading. And so to Mr. Bradley's point, they do have us above, if you were to extend it that way and look at the projections, it does take us above 5,000. There are moderate projections and conservative projections. One set of the numbers is ones that you budget and you staff to. The other set of numbers is what you build your buildings to, the facilities. And so all that to say, they did help support our planning for our projects. We are going to, I think, continue growing, maybe to your question, and continue to monitor that closely. Thank you. In terms of local revenue, we talked about that 4.3 million, and so I don't have many graphs in this presentation. There are more numbers because we did talk about these at the trends discussion back in January, and so I will make a few connections though back to that discussion from January as we talk through this. But so assessment growth and collection rate increase. If you remember, we talked about how assessed values have been growing by about 2 or 3%, which is $1 million. And so as that 2 or 3% growth happens every year, that's not an increase in real estate taxes, that's just growth in the community. And so that $1 million is an adjustment to reflect that. That's different than the 1% that you see below that for the financing plan. That is the 1% that we're saying we are setting aside purposefully to fund ongoing construction and build our budget up in a way that allows us to step it in, but step it in over a period of years and not so dramatically. And then the real estate tax increase, operational cost, again, the TBD, we did talk about that already. That will be coming as we finalize the budget in the next several weeks. We still want to review with the board the staff, the proposed staffing, and then a final recommendation around expenses, and we'll be back with our recommendations there here in the next few weeks. Earned income taxes is at $2.1 million, another big increase. Frankly, and the board probably recalls, when I came to Mechanicsburg 8 years ago, and this was true when I was at a prior district before that, on average, the state increase in wages is around 3 or 4%. And because EIT is a wage tax, usually if wages are growing by 3 or 4%, it's what you can expect to see in your revenue is 3 to 4% growth. That has been pretty typical for quite a long time. For the last couple of years, we've seen it outpace that 3 or 4% quite significantly. And so for 22, 23, and 23, 24, we saw percentages as high as 10 and 12% in wage growth. I think there's two things happening there. One, I think wages in general have grown more quickly in general because of a lot of things happening in the economy, but also because of growth. You're adding more population, and that also is contributing to income tax revenue. interest income, we used to joke a little bit about this, not joke, that's not the right word, but how it's a funny graph, if I had the graph in here, but the trends, I think we did talk about it in January, how low it was at one point because interest rates were at historic lows. And so in some ways, it was timed well that we issued as much debt as we did and the timing we did because we got to maximize and take advantage of those very low interest rates. Now that interest rates are up at 4, 5, and 6%, we're earning more on the district's investments and deposits. And this is really a credit to Bobby Ely and the rest of the finance team. Mrs. Ely does a great job of looking at cash flow, managing CDs, working with our banks and our, if you look at our treasury report, you can see where we distribute our money. And we're seeing good increases in interest income such that we're feeling comfortable with recommending an additional increase in revenue there.
It seems like a high number.
It does seem like
I
a high
don't know
number.
if I've ever seen that number.
It is a big number, and I'll say that we're still being conservative with it. We don't want to chase it all. We talk about peaks and valleys in budgeting. We don't want to chase it all the way to the peak, right? Because the Federal Reserve is talking about at some point starting to cut rates. And so even though 23-24 might be a high point, 23-24 for revenue, Ms. Morgan, to your point, I think it's a good one, that might not be, we might not want to budget to the high point because if the Fed starts to reduce rates, which looks like at some point they will, if inflation moderates, we'll start to see a corresponding decrease in rates and interest earnings. And so we just want to manage that carefully. Other revenue adjustments is a variety of things. You'll see that in your budget binders at the end of the month, but we really like to focus on the big changes, and that's what we're talking about here tonight. In terms of state revenue, probably have seen the governor's budget proposal. It's a pretty ambitious one. Our approach for years at Mechanicsburg has been that we don't want to just assume we're going to get flat funded because generally the state legislature and the governor's office does find a way to find some kind of increase. We also don't necessarily go right to the governor's, whoever the governor is in January, February, because this is, over the years, we've had many different governors, but we usually don't go right to whatever the governor's proposing either. And we usually pick a middle ground to say, based on what we know about the budget process, where we think is realistic. And so 1.6 million is a big increase, admittedly. So a little context there. The board probably recalls this time last year, we had budgeted an increase, probably in the magnitude of 4 or 5% of state revenue for basic education funding. What came through as they finalized the budget was, frankly, a historic increase. And that caused us to get even more money than what we anticipated. And so some of this 1.6 million is actually catching us up on what went above and beyond even our expectations. And then as we look forward to next year and looking at the governor's proposal, knowing that we want to take a middle ground approach, we don't want to budget necessarily an 18% increase in state funding because that's what is in the governor's proposal. 0 is not right either. And so about 800 or 900,000 of that 1.6 million is what we're assuming we're going to get in the governor's budget proposal. So,
Mr. Longwell, you paint a really rosy picture of what the state is pushing through EEF, which is it sounds great, but when you go back to that original graph of only getting 24% from the state, I mean, it still doesn't really match up with, they still haven't caught up even with historic increases for us, but for the 6th fastest growing district in the state, they're still not quite fair to us.
And I'm glad you said that, Mr. Sanker. And I think that also points to why a couple things. One, yes, that's very true, and I'll come back to my second point in a minute. But so much of basic education funding is still in hold harmless. And so that for many, many years was each of the 500 school districts got what they got last year plus 2 or 3%. Well, that works really well for you if you are kind of holding stable with enrollment, or if maybe even if you're declining. I don't want to say declining is a good thing, but if you're declining enrollment and you're not seeing a decline, a corresponding decrease in your state funding, well, that actually works out in your favor. Where if you've grown like us by 20 or more % over a period of years, that does pose challenges that a portion of our state funding is still in this hold harmless model where we're not getting a proportional increase based on our growth in enrollment. I think the second point I wanted to make was, and this is why we do take a conservative approach with the governor's proposal, is there's a lot of layers to it. I think if you look at the governor's proposal, when you say things like Pittsburgh is getting 1% increase and Philly's getting probably close to 20%, immediately you probably draw a line in the sand for the legislature that they've got a debate about, right? And so there's the whole harmless component. There's the student weighted formula, which was what we've been under for a number of years, and some of the basic education funding money does go through that formula. But now they've introduced another third area that they intend to try to equalize and address the funding inequity because of the lawsuit that happened. And so there's a lot of negotiation that has to happen. The reason I share that is there's a lot of negotiation that has to happen with the state legislature and how much money is available to be given out to schools. How are they going to give the money out to schools? There's the funding lawsuit, there's the weighted formula, lots of complexity there. And so we could probably spend the rest of the night talking about that. I do, it does interest me, but I don't want to be respectful of everyone's time. The reason the top two are spaced a little bit differently than the rest, you see the bullet, the asterisk there. It's very nice to see the increases of the asterisk items, but those are reimbursement basis revenues. And so what I mean by that is, for instance, retirement reimbursement, we get about 50% of our retirement PSERS expense reimbursed to us. So said another way, it's nice to see 300,000 here. Really what that means is there's a $500,000 or $600,000 increase on the expense side of the budget. So not to be the bearer of bad news by way of preview, but these asterisks generally are the result of increasing expenses. It's good that we're getting them, but also indicative of some other things that are happening in the budget.
So those are like the clothes with a receipt in the trunk. When you return the clothes, you're not actually getting that money. You had to actually spend the money to get the clothes. Okay,
And almost twice as much money.
Yeah.
than you spent.
I see.
And the federal, I think a credit to again, board administration and how we managed our ESSER money. We did, as a reminder, use it in two main areas as we navigated the pandemic. One was to address operating costs, but then also supporting academic achievement. And we've been stepping that out of our budget, frankly, so that we didn't find ourselves in this moment having to take out a 7-digit number out of the budget. And so we were very purposeful in how we managed those grants and those funds, spreading them out evenly over the years, but also from a budget perspective, stepping it out so that it didn't create massive challenges for us. And again, I think kudos to the board and administration for planning, because it leaves us in a position where we're not having to do something really drastic. So that was the revenue side of the budget, part one. We will come back at the end of the month with part two, where we do talk about expense trends, but also look at staff proposals and take a deeper dive there. And I'll open it to any questions that the board might have.
So I appreciate you indulging us with quite the extensive superintendent's report tonight. Trust me, this helped lay the groundwork for our next meeting. Won't necessarily have to be 6 hours long. So some of these things had to get done tonight to preview. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Leidy. For the 3.02 Capital Area Intermediate Unit, Mr. Bradley.
And Mr. Longwell, I thought I was going to be tough following the kindergartners. I don't know, I'm going to follow the excitement level of the budget.
That's right.
I'll try my best.
I think it'll be good.
The intermediate unit met on the 22nd of February. Covered a lot of different bits and pieces throughout that time. I keep saying that I'm going to send the all-in article or the newsletter, and I keep forgetting to send it. I will send it. There was a very interesting article in there. They talked about adaptive bikes and strollers. And I thought about that as we were looking at the Wildcat, Operation Wildcat, where they had the bikes, creating the bikes. And what these bikes and strollers are, they've raised money over a period of time, and they're able to purchase these adaptive bikes and the strollers so that the kids can actually sit and pedal the bikes and steer the bikes themselves. And they said the funniest thing this year was, in previous years, the handlebars would have an extension, like a pole on the extension, so that the parents could walk along and steer the bike as it was going along. And the kids hated that because mom and dad are steering. And so they created one where it came under the bike and actually went behind the bike, where mom and dad could steer from behind. And they said the kids just lit up and their faces were just overjoyed with seeing that and having that capability. So they were very happy. It's a big event that they have where they actually give the kids the bikes and the kids will ride the bike through the building for a loop or two around. And they said you just see the pure joy in their face, and it's something very, very touching. And one of the miniature fundraisers that they have is they have a bingo night, which is coming up in April, that they do that. And they said it's not a come and have fun bingo, it's a let's be serious, but these are serious bingo players that go out. So if anybody wants any information on the bingo night, let me know and I have that. We also spent a little bit of time, Dr. Roberts went through, we had done the strategic plan. He went over the comprehensive plan, all 76 pages of it. But actually, he gave us a Reader's Digest condensed summary because he said it would have been, I'm sure, as riveting as the financial outlay that we had earlier. But he gave us a condensed version of talking about the comprehensive plan, focusing in on how the comprehensive plan is the compliance side, the strategic plan is more along the vision and mission, and how the two of them came together. So it was interesting to see how those pieces come together. They continue to talk about and focus in on looking at the 24-25 calendar year, look at the budget and everything to see how the programs are played out. In the very near future, we will have the budget, the operating expenses budget coming in. That is the only budget from the intermediate unit that we actually vote on. They have dozens and dozens of other budgets, but those budgets are usually tied to a program. So their budgets are directly tied. The operating one is the one that we will get a copy, and probably within the next April meeting, we have to vote on that to decide whether or not we approve that. And then we will be meeting, because of scheduling, we won't be meeting until the very end, so we'll be meeting on the 28th of March as our next meeting. So that's my report.
Questions for Mr. Bradley? Thank you for a fine report, Mr. Bradley. 3.03, Cumberland Perry Area Career and Technical Center, Mr. Sanger.
Thank you. The CTC's Joint Operating Committee last met on February 26th. We heard an update on co-op programs, among other things. I thought this was interesting to share. They have 110 students out on co-op, so students who are earning wages while they're still in school, and they shared wage ranges with us. The lowest wage is $16.64 an hour, and the highest is a masonry student earning $27.42 an hour. So that was pretty great.
What happened to minimum wage?
Workers.
Yeah, exactly.
High school kids.
Skilled high school kids. Skilled. That's the difference. So yesterday and today, the CTC held tours for all eighth graders among the 13 sending districts. So that's about 3,000 students, actually more than 3,000 that they toured through the buildings over the last 2 days. They were originally scheduled in the fall, but happened to be when the fuel oil leak happened, so had to be rescheduled to this week. So thanks to our middle school and the administration for coordinating that, and what announced with giant field trip. I think that they said they see 9 programs, 5 minutes each with each program. So it's a whirlwind, I imagine, tour. In other news, the plans for the building project cleared Silver Spring Township. We chose a bond counsel for the district, for the districts that are issuing debt for their portion of the project. Mechanics Works paying cash for our portion as is. I think, I may have this wrong, but I think it's 9 districts are self-financing and the other 4 are issuing debt collectively. So the next steps for that bond sale are that sometime in March, we will likely have a special meeting for the closing, all the documents and the results of the sale there. We met with the architect. We meet with the architect each month in committee. This month we reviewed renderings for the exterior and some of the signage and all that. So things are moving along there, which is good to see. Our next meeting is likely a special meeting just to approve the bond sale documents. We typically also take off in March as a meeting date, so other than that special meeting, the next meeting will be in April. That's my report.
Questions for Mr. Sanger? Thank you, Mr. Sanger. PSBA legislative report. I have no report other than the updates you get from them. I have been watching for the spring advocacy day at the Capitol. I haven't seen anything yet. It's nothing. You're off that day. Have you seen it?
Yes, so
I think I did, but I'll get the date out to
Okay,
everybody.
but it's in April, I assume. It's usually when they've been having it. They've moved it around. They tried to move it earlier in the year, so they're not competing with the homeschool group in May. So.
I'll get it to you.
Yeah, we'll have it, so, okay. Item 3.05, Finance Facilities Committee report, Mr. Sanger.
The committee did not meet, but I feel as though we had a good meeting just earlier on hearing the revenue side. So thanks again, Mr. Longo, for that. But nothing on the agenda tonight.
And 3.06, Board President report. I'd like to announce an executive session held on February 27th, 2024 at 7:35 p.m. to discuss personnel matters. An executive session held on March 5th, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. to discuss personnel matters. And an executive session held on March 12th, 2024 following tonight's meeting to discuss personnel matters. And that concludes my report. Item 5, new business, athletics, recreation. Dr. Lee, Dr. Rhodes.
Yeah, you can call me Dr. Lee. I asked the board to approve the pool management agreement for the 2024 pool season.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I have a question. So with the pool being out of condition until construction is finished, is there a provision to allow the swim team to practice further into September like they did last year?
So a couple pieces to that's a good question. A couple pieces to your question. So the first part is yes, Mr. Bannock has been working on options to provide opportunities for the swim team with other local facilities, I'll say. With respect to the pool management agreement, this is the situation where we have our own pool, but the pool management agreement is something that we enter into with the Borough of Mechanicsburg to manage their pool for the summer season through our recreation department. And as part of that, we oversee the program, we employ the staff, the borough pays us back and reimburses us the costs, which is kind of what the agreement captures there. But so a couple pieces there there's what we're doing with our swim team, where they're going, but then also what's happening with Florida. So
There's a provision in there for swim practice outside of the pool.
Yeah.
It's in there.
And once it gets past the beginning of September, it gets pretty cold.
yes.
In a non-heated pool. All right, any further comments, questions? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 6, new business, budget and finance. Item 6.01, Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the treasurer's report as per the attachments, which include the following. Number 1 is the treasurer's report for February 2024. Number 2 is the board budget report for February 2024. Number 3 is the general fund invoices paid, check number 67874 through 68045 in the amount of $1,793,641.24. Number 4 is electronic payment in the amount of $4,227,911.43. Number 5 is the general fund invoices payable, check number 68046 through 68070 in the amount of $617,089.03. Number 6 is the capital reserve fund invoices paid, check number 1893 through 1897 in the amount of $65,519.05. Number 7 is the series of 2023 construction fund invoices paid, check number 171 through 186 in the amount of $1,815,235.02. And last is the investment portfolio.
A second.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I have a question about the security services on the board budget report. It's about 300% budget. Is that for we're putting the public safety officer in the school, or what? Do we know what that's coming from?
Could you say it
I
again?
think it was security services. It's running about 300%.
of the budget. Just looking to see in the report where, you know, what page that's on.
I think it was like page 45.
45, you said.
Count 2,600. It's 2,660.
2,600.
Page 4.
So 2,600 is our, that's the account code for all of our facilities and buildings and grounds. Without, I'd have to look into additional detail, and we can provide an update to the board maybe on tonight. But that is facilities, and it would be something connected to security services or school police or something along those lines, is my guess. But
We can get back to you.
yeah.
Any other discussion, questions? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
6.02, Ms. Morgan.
I ask the board to appoint Gallagher Insurance as the district's insurance broker per the attachment.
With a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
6.03, Mr. Kickline.
I ask the board to approve the tax policies report as presented in the attachment.
With a second.
Second.
Further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 7, new business, curriculum. Item 7.01, Dr. Rhodes.
I ask the board to approve the school calendar for 2024-2025 as per the attachment.
With a second.
Second.
I do have a question for Dr. Leidy. Setting aside feedback of like childcare issues, busing and things like that, is I do hear an increasing concern amongst particularly elementary parents of the actual content of what's being done. I just wonder if you'd like to talk a little on like where we got to here, where you see this going, what committees you have set up, you know, what interactions, just kind of explain publicly, like where we come to this and what you see it going to as these options become available.
Yeah, so they're great questions, and honestly, we're really entering some new territory here as it relates to snow days. Obviously, we had the experience related to the pandemic, but this is more about what happens in situations where we need to cancel school because of weather emergencies. And so a couple things that I think are important to note. One is that we've only done this once. This year was the first time that we actually used a day for remote days. Here's the reality. As we look back on historically, there's been years where we've used 8, 9, or 10 snow days. You might recall that we're close to the anniversary of using 5 in 1 week. I think was a March storm back in '93, if you will. So the reality is that nobody wants to use that many remote days. That is true, and then I would encourage us to think about if we were to get beyond a certain number of days, do we begin to look at making those days up? Here's the challenge. The way the calendar is currently set up, those days would extend into the middle of June, really. And so what you have to balance is how much value are you getting out of those days in the middle of June versus what you're getting out of the remote day. And so I think moving forward, this is new territory. I think we learned some things from that day as being a snow day. That we're never going to replicate exactly what happens in our schools. It's why I said the last time, I'm glad we made the investment in construction that we did, because we need these schools and we know it's best for our kids to be in school. That said, the weather creates havoc, and there's still going to be a sacrifice when you call those days. I will tell you that in 14 years as being the superintendent, it's the worst job I have, is trying to make a decision about the safety of kids versus, bringing them in. And growing up in Western PA, it's been a challenge because we traveled in a lot of weather that we choose not to travel in schools. The remote days, I think we're going to keep learning about them. I think we'll keep learning more about how to make them better. The challenge with using computers is that oftentimes these children go to either grandparents' house or somebody else's house who may not know how to access the computers themselves. And so the packets, albeit far from ideal, do allow the children to engage with something for the day. And I do believe our teachers have done a really nice job trying to make it relevant to what the students are learning. So
I'd like to comment too. I mean, I know when we used to push school, when I was in high school, we used to push school into June and so forth, but those days were not exactly productive. It just delayed your summer vacation most of the time. I think I remember watching movies in class for some of those days. I don't know if you should do that. But does this also apply to some of the new legislature, which has you, attending for days or hours as well? So even though it might not be the same level of education happening, it does count as a day, and there's enough hours to make up.
There probably is. I'll be honest here, we don't look at that simple compliance piece. We're always kind of above and beyond that anyway. But there probably is some connection there in terms of actually counting the days. The reality is that, and I think about where I was philosophically in 2018 around Act 80 time, right? And when I came to Mechanicsburg, you didn't use Act 80 time. What is Act 80 time? Act 80 time is, by law, you're allowed to replace teacher professional development, student instructional time with teacher professional development, right? What did we learn through the pandemic was you get some pretty significant gains by having quality professional development that pays off for weeks and months beyond that professional development with the student. So we've taken advantage of offering more of those, what we call Act 80 days, in addition to our professional development days. The reality is that's instructional time, right? And so that is something that you could go back and look at next year is instead of using those Act 80 days, could you, if you had a blizzard, right, could you cancel those Act 80 days? It's a decision the board could make at the time and the recommendation could come in. The challenge with that is a ton of work goes into those Act 80 days to make them quality. So as soon as you say, well, we're going to cancel this for this, there's a sacrifice no matter how you do it, right? And I think as the adults here, we have to acknowledge there's no perfect answer to this from an education perspective.
I totally appreciate all of that. I think this is an area where we can improve here in the school district. I really do. I would love to see those home instructional days to be much more robust. I don't even know what that means. I'm not an educator. I feel like I'm slowly starting to tiptoe into micromanaging, and I always try not to do that. So please understand what I'm saying here. But I do know that other districts, I don't know exactly how other districts do it, but I do know that when other districts have these snow days and these remote learning days, they're locked in for most of the day. I mean, I have friends who have students that they're locked in with their team. They have actually scheduled times where they have to be locked in. Now, I understand that there are technical issues that
Locked in, you mean online?
They're actually getting instruction on their computers via Zoom and whatnot. So I do know I would just as a board member like to see us always try to improve. I absolutely hear what parents are saying. I do, and I think we would all be remiss and we would be ignoring our constituents if we said we didn't hear what they were saying every time we had one of these home instructional days. I know that, I've been fortunate and I've had very, very high functioning students as kids, and they lock in. But there are younger kids and there are kids that I think need more robust instruction. on these days. I
Isn't
don't
it a
know.
case where the higher grades have the technology, have the computers, the lower grades do not, and so as a result, with the lower grades, it's the packet that gets sent home as opposed to having them log in and have more direct interaction with the teacher, with the support, whatever they need. So the struggle you run into is the technology is not there for the younger kids as opposed to when you get into middle school, high school, the technology is there, we have it, and they have that capability. And then
Speaking
you
of
get
technology.
into, speaking of technology, and then you get into that balance of what can you do to engage that younger group and keep them engaged. And I think the one thing that we just, as he said, it's new, we have to continue to look at it, continue to look at areas like our regular curriculum, look at areas to improve, and just continue to work on improving that to make it more meaningful. Not that what they're doing today isn't meaningful, but increase it a little bit, make it more, because I don't think we're ever gonna get to that point where K through 5 are gonna be walking and having the same technology available that 6 through
12.
Senior, that number, I couldn't think of, 6 through 12 are gonna have.
They do have the same tech. I mean, they have the iPads. I think to Dr. Leidy's point of the tech support and the amount of management that they're not as self-sufficient for.
Well, we're not
for that.
sending them home with
We do at times.
at times, but on a snow day, we're not sending,
Yeah,
with the snow day, we're not sending them home with
But I think that's to the tech support problem, not the tech problem.
But not sending them home with that limits what options you have.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I agree.
But I think this is an area, not to interrupt, but I think this is an area where we can actually tap into our parents and constantly get feedback from parents, because they're the ones who are at home experiencing what their child is experiencing during the day. So this is an area where, as a school district, we can improve by tapping into some of the recommendations of the parents. Whereas, we're not gonna ask the parents, hey, how should our teachers teach in school? You're not gonna ask that, but we can tap into our parents in terms of what the experience of their kids during these times and maybe improve. I don't know.
I don't want to negate that, because we had a discussion about this at the work session, and I'm a parent, and Jason's a parent, and of the elementary kids, and so it wasn't just like we can go get feedback too, but I think we're somewhat tapped in even at the high school level of how it works, but I agree, naturally you'd assume you'd have above average, we're not a representative sample of our kids, because I would like to think my kid handled, the day pretty well, and you're describing high-performing kids, so I think that there's definitely some other challenge, but I don't want to make it seem like we need to go find the, feedback when, we talk about a lot of this too here.
No, I get it, I'm not saying that
No, I'm just saying we're all, there's some perspective we can lend ourselves to it too.
I think it struck a good balance. I mean, it was something they could do fairly readily, fairly easily. We had electricity, that helped. But, I think if you try to make it too challenging and too time intensive, you're gonna get flack from that side. So I think it was a good balance.
Isn't the ratios were like 10 or 15 minutes of homework per grade level?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, are you trying to send them home with like a homework assignment?
Yeah, I just think we have to be really
First graders are going to
careful.
get 10, 15 minutes or.
Right. I think we have to be really careful to put into context what we're talking about here. We're talking about a day that you can't plan for really in advance, because you don't know when they're coming, right? And we can't assume that the way it was 5 years ago was great either, because those of us that lived being in a classroom in the middle of June knows what happened in classrooms in the middle of June, right? I remember '93. I was teaching, and I remember what it was like to try to teach kids in the middle of June. It was moving, and I was a good teacher, but we were just trying to get through at that point, right? So I think we just have to put in the context. I think there's a couple discussions here. One is, do we like remote learning? I'll be the first to tell you, no, I don't. I also don't like going to school in the middle of June, right? That's pretty clear. Can we get better at remote learning? We have to, and I think we will. But let's not mistake that once that tool is available, which it is, to those beyond us, that impacts us too. And I will tell you, making snow calls for years, what I have noticed with the last 2 years is now that the remote days are available, those snow calls are coming through from colleagues pretty quickly. And I'm going, whoa, wait a second, we used to not make these calls until 4:30 in the morning, the day of, and now we're making it the night before. But here's the other side to that. You got a lot of parents saying, thank you for making the decision the night before, because we gotta figure out childcare. So I will just tell you from experience, you are never going to solve this issue through a calendar, period. You keep trying, and good luck, but you're not gonna solve it through this calendar. It is too complicated of an issue to please everybody. And with all due respect to getting feedback from parents, Mr. Eckelmeyer, our principal at Shepherdstown, did request feedback from parents, got 19 responses, and 17 or 18 of those responses were extremely, not just positive, extremely positive. Now, he only got 19 responses, but I also know we live in a community where if people are really upset, they're going to tell us about it, right? So I'm just trying to lay a little groundwork here from experience, but also what are we really talking about? I do think we have an issue once we get past 3 or 4 snow days. Then you got to step back and say, now we're talking about some significant impact on instructional time. Do we need to look at some of those days and reconsider what those days may be? And this board will have the option to do that. You just have to communicate out far enough in advance for families if you're going to change what the calendar looks like.
So we've actually done away with the 3-day snow days that we used to have.
Yeah, for years, I'm going to say at least 10 years, we only had 2 built in to begin with.
Yeah.
And then we started adding on to the end of the year. And in some years, even that second of the 2 was adding on to the end of the year. So this year we had 1 built in and we used it. And then we used 1 day as a remote day.
So nothing will be well, unless we get snow tomorrow, but nothing's gonna be added on in June.
I was expecting a day on Friday, you could have it done, right?
That is correct, yeah. Yep.
Because you always go into the stories too, how a lot of families schedule vacations for, the following week. And then you've got these people upset because now the kids have to go to school for 2 or 3 days.
That was his point, I think. I think you just made his point. But.
So you could use the Act 80 days, we don't want to. Remote learning is a way to kind of prevent us from going into June. And
So, yeah, I was gonna ask about the 180 days too. Isn't there something going on about we don't have to have the 180 days?
Yeah, so it used to say you had to have 180 days and a certain number of hours, depending on elementary or secondary. They changed 1 word in the legislation to or. And so now it's either 180 days or meeting the hour requirement. So essentially what we're doing now is that we're looking at that hour requirement because a day can look different in different school districts, right? And when you look at the hours that we have, we far exceed the hour requirement in this district, which is what has allowed us to add some more teacher training days in the schedule.
So there's a possibility something like a weather delay or day might not even have to be made up if you're going by the hours, or we don't, I mean, I know that's.
No, I'm laughing because that's a whole nother, just to keep going down this rabbit hole, 2-hour delays never get made up.
Right.
We had a year where we had 13 2-hour delays, 26 hours of instructional time. None of that got made up. When you equate that to school days, that's 6 school days.
Well, you can even do the early dismissal also in that same day, and you don't have to make it up. I mean,
So I think it's real. It's something we got to get better at. I would agree 100%. But when you're looking at it happening a couple times a year, how much investment of time are we going to put into that compared to the curriculum overall or instruction?
Well, that was was going to be part of the point that I left out. I understand we're talking about a finite number of days. I get that. But
I think you can see from the input of the board, it is something that
Absolutely.
touches everybody and everybody hears about, that it's.
Absolutely.
And we just have to continue making sure we're doing the best at that time and our resources. Any further discussions? Mr. Longwell?
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 8, new business facilities. Item 8.01, Mr. Sanger.
I make a motion to acknowledge Plan Con Part H revision for Northside Elementary as per the attached.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 9, new business personnel. Item 9.01, Mr. Bradley.
I'd ask the board to approve the personnel report as per the attachments.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further? Go ahead.
Just a concern on, we have a number of special ed folks leaving. Is there a plan to replace some of the special education instructors? Or how are we handling that?
Anytime a position comes available, we evaluate that position and then we post as soon as possible. I will tell you, generically speaking, special ed, along with many other certifications, continues to be a huge challenge.
So I have a question if, this particular person is not on the list, but I understand they were interviewed on Friday. Will they have to wait an entire month before they can start work?
I think we're bordering
Yeah,
on an executive session.
Yeah, I don't think we can go, we'll talk about that tonight at our brief executive session. If you were. Yeah, I don't think we want to go there. Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 9.02, Mr. Bradley.
With a heavy heart, I ask the board to approve the intent to not renew the superintendent's contract by Dr. Mark Lighty.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
A point of order, Mr. Chair, if we reject this, this motion fails, does that mean that, that we do renew the contract?
To be truthful with you, we're getting into a huge legal matter that Dr. Lighty and our solicitor and I spent some time on the phone between Friday and this morning on. And this is actually required that we do this. If we don't do this, and I mean, there's law and there's intent of law, and it's not really important which one we'd be following, but if this is not done, essentially Dr. Lighty's contract would remain in effect for 1 year. And that's what I gather.
Yeah, and then you'd have to pay me to not be here, which you don't want to do that.
Correct. And there's a whole host of reasons that we could have discussed, legal reasons in an executive session that this has to be done.
I should have started by saying, as a joke, Mr. Chair, if we don't approve
Well,
this.
I don't mind discussing this
Yeah.
because it is something that we had to put on, and we had explored different options for other reasons that we'll discuss later. But this must be done. This is the protocol. That this protects actually the district and the taxpayers, that the man has announced he's leaving, he's retiring, he's not renewing his contract, and this is what we must do legally to protect the interest of the district. So,
I'll make a comment. When I first came on the board, it was because I thought I was a leader and that I could really affect change. And through the last 6 years, I believe, working with Dr. Lighty, he has really mentored me and really taught me what being a leader is. And I went from being just an anesthesiologist to now basically running 7 hospitals. And I've had to tap into a lot of that leadership. So I'm just forever grateful for what you have taught me about leadership and about being a person responsible for many people and how that takes a lot of sacrifice. You and I have been through a lot with COVID. You taught me more than I can possibly ever thank you for. So yeah, I'm grateful that I had this time on this board with you. I really am.
we'll have another opportunity to wish him well.
It's hard to top anyway. Good. Excellent night.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell?
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
9.03, Mr. Bradley.
I'd ask the board to approve the affiliation agreement with Cedarville University as per the attached.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just a brief note to Mr. Schaefer's comment about supervision from afar for in-person supervisions. Is there a provision for how that's going to be handled? I think that
Yeah,
should be.
so typically what they do is they will hire an adjunct that is local. I think that I would have to go back and look at this further, but I don't think it's meant or intended to be Zoom. I just want and appreciate having the opportunity to speak to this a little bit. I feel like I'm always talking about 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But I will say, 5 years ago, we probably would not have done this. For many of the reasons, frankly, that Mr. Schaefer brought up, and I think they're accurate 5 years ago. I think what has changed, which he acknowledged, is the pipeline is severely lacking flow. The other piece is that we typically only are doing this with individuals who have graduated from Mechanicsburg, who have gone outside of the region and want to come back to Mechanicsburg through the university.
I remember that being the case brought up.
Yes.
Last time people.
And that is the case with this one also.
So this person's not taking a seat from someone at SHIP who
No.
wants to be a student teacher here.
No.
And, no, I'm sorry.
And in terms of quality of students, although our local universities are phenomenal and produce really quality candidates, there are times where they don't, right? And we have mechanisms in place to address when a student teacher is not at the caliber that we would want them to be with our students. And I give our staff a tremendous amount of credit that they just won't put up with it. They won't put their own professional name on the line. So if there is a situation with an individual that's not meeting our standards, that will get addressed, whether they're from a local university or one of these extended opportunities.
And that would be my question, right? Like it isn't so much, it doesn't matter where they come from.
Right.
It matters what our process is for them when they're here in instruction.
And also that they want to be here. I think that's like.
But it's a student teaching.
This wasn't
month,
randomly
right?
picked. This is somebody who wants to student teach here. And I
Yeah.
think that speaks for our district, and our administrative and staff.
And their family in the area, so chances are.
Absolutely.
they'll come back.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 10, new business, policy 10.01. We'll try this again this month. Mr. Frangel.
Rachel, yes. I ask the board to approve the second and final reading of revised board policy 127, assessment of educational program as per the attachment.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
10.02. Peter?
Rachel, yes.
I can't say it, so I'll call you Peter. I have a speech.
I ask the board to approve the second and final reading of the revised board policy 216.1, supplemental discipline records as per the attached.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? And lastly, 10.03.
Just, if I could, unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
And 10.03.
And I ask the board to approve the second and final reading of the new board policy 254, educational opportunity for military children as per the attachment.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 12, hearing of visitors. Item 12.01. We have reached the second opportunity for public comment. This opportunity is reserved for comments on issues not listed on the agenda and not being voted upon this evening. As a reminder, public comment is limited to residents of the school district. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per individual and requires community members to observe a reasonable decorum. If you'd like to address the board, please come up to the podium, share your name and district address. Seeing no one, item 13, Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Meeting is adjourned. We'll have a brief executive session. We'll give